Welcome everyone to episode 21 of Ty's Training Talking with My Dad. This is our special end of season episode, our season finale, if you will. I'm Ty, and here as always with my wonderful co-host and father, Tim Andrews, aka Mr. C, and his cat Theodosia there, if you're on our YouTube channel, for a look today at the end of our season here on Mount Everest. Well, here, I'm not there anymore. We are in the same house. We are just in different rooms for once, finally. Just easier to record this way. But
Yep.
I am officially done. We're done with Project Himalaya, at least the spring 2025 edition. Lots to talk about, lots to debrief. And yeah, it's it's good to be back somewhere where I can wear a t-shirt and it's warm and there's oxygen. And yeah, definitely sad to have left the big mountains, but happy to be down here for a little while. Mr. C, how are you doing? How's your last couple weeks gone? A few more gray hairs, maybe?
Yeah. It's great to see you. We're happy to have you back, and it is great to be in the warm weather with the sun out today, especially. So we're doing well. As you know, we were in the UK on vacation and had a great vacation, except for the sleepless nights while you were running up and down the biggest mountain in the world. So yes, we definitely.
Yep.
I mean, I can't get many more gray hairs because I just don't have that much. But yes, if there's any room left, I'm sure we added a few.
All right. Well, I know you were asking me right before we recorded, like, hey, we haven't really talked about it, so let's talk about it. Let's dive into it. We've got a whole list of questions to kind of walk through the last really two attempts, because last time we all chatted, it was right before I went up for attempt number two. So I will let you take it away and kind of drive the conversation here.
All right. So last time we talked, you were getting ready for your attempt on the 24th of May. And today is June 3rd. You made not just one, but two more attempts up Everest. So before we go into the details, just walk us through the last week and a half.
So to go back to that probably May 23rd when we were recording, really thought that that was going to be the one. We at that point were working with the assumption that the mountain was going to close pretty soon, like within a day or two after that, so that it was pretty much do or die. You know, we talked about on that attempt, having the weather was not perfect, and again, I'm gonna talk a little bit more in detail, but basically, we went up that day. Weather was not perfect. It was windy. I got turned around by Dawa, pretty high up on the mountain, came back down, and I thought my season was over. Flew back to Kathmandu, had a beer with some friends that night, went to bed, woke up the next morning, figured out, hey, there's actually one more window. They're keeping the mountain open. We'll talk about that in more detail. Went back to the mountain the same day, and then made one more attempt. And, you know, spoiler alert, it also didn't go for a variety of reasons, which we'll talk about. But yeah, two attempts in I think 3 days or something like that. It was just body was totally exhausted. But I left Nepal, left the Khumbu, feeling like I had actually really left it all out there. Like I could not have made another attempt. And then had a couple days in Kathmandu, flew back through Dubai, met up with some friends there for a night, and then, Chris and I sadly parted our ways for our bromance, and he flew back to Dallas, and then I just got back to Massachusetts here. So it's been a whirlwind, let's say, I don't know what it's been, a week, 10 days at this point since that first attempt. But yeah, we can dive into the details a little bit and talk through each one and kind of what happened and what we learned.
Okay, so let's start with the May 24th attempt. This was supposed to be the big one. Looked like you had, and you had a big last minute change due to the weather, I think. But you can explain with regard to using supplemental oxygen. So take us through that and how that impacted your attempt that day.
This project was always about, for me, climbing without oxygen, and so it definitely was a pretty disruptive last minute change. Long story short, the way that cold affects your body is exacerbated when you're really hypoxic. And one of the ways that that manifests itself in the big mountains in terms of logistics is that climbing with gas, you have a much wider margin of safety. You can deal with much colder temperatures. You can deal with much higher wind up there when you're climbing with oxygen, because your body just doesn't get as hypoxic. So it's much less susceptible to frostbite, other cold related injuries that are really common for no gas climbers. And so my plan was always to climb without oxygen. That was what I was preparing for. It was why I've been biking at, 11,000 meters of effective altitude for the last, month or so in Nepal, and been focusing so much on that side. And it literally wasn't until the day that we were going to leave that we made this call. And the reason was the wind. The wind was kind of the story of this whole season, unfortunately. The jet stream, which is the air between about, 25 and 40,000 feet. It's the air that blows airplanes around up in the air. It's the reason that your flight to London is 2 hours faster one way than the other. That air touches the top of Mount Everest for almost the entire year. And in usually mid to late May, that jet stream lifts up a little bit. It moves north into China and Mongolia. And so Everest is left a little bit calmer. What we found, unfortunately, this season was that jet stream, there was kind of a little tiny tail that just kept tickling the mountain. And so it wasn't full jet stream force winds of, those are over 100 miles an hour sometimes, but it was just enough that it was impacting our margin of safety, 30, 40, 50, 60 miles an hour, which is a lot. It's a lot when you're, it's already minus 20 degrees and you're at super hypoxic. So we had multiple professional mountain forecasters, Chris Tomer, Dr. Carl Sabe with Asian Trekking, a handful of other people whose reports that we were getting. And it looked like the 23rd, 24th, it was going to be right on the edge of tolerable wind for an oxygenated climb, not for a no gas climb. We literally had all of our weather guys were saying, do not climb this day. You will not summit. If you do, you will lose fingers and toes. It's too cold. And so we made the really hard decision at the last minute to pivot to doing an oxygenated climb with supplemental oxygen and trying for that record, which we've mentioned a couple times is quite fast. It's 10 hours and 40 minutes as opposed to 20 hours, so it's almost half the time. And the big thing with that is it just makes it safer. We really thought this is the absolute last day. This is our only opportunity. And to me, it was more important to go up and try and get a record, try and do something that represented, how hard I'd worked for this preparation. And that in this case, that was an ox climb. So we did pivot. I had like literally like a last minute 15-minute tutorial. Here's how you use your mask. Here's how you use your regulator. Here's how you use the tank. All that stuff from Dallas Steven. And yeah, I ended up using oxygen from a little bit above Camp 2, so around 7,000 meters, 6,800 meters, I think, at the Bergstrand was when we started using it. And it was a big impact for sure. I mean, it obviously it's a much faster record, so it's a shorter attempt, which in some ways makes it simpler. It makes it a little safer. But climbing with gas, it's a very new tool that I hadn't used before. I didn't really know what the best flow rate was, as well as literally just you do have to carry a tank of it's like a scuba tank, and it weighs about 12, 15 pounds, about
Wow.
5, 8 kilos. So it's not light. But the positive impact you get from climbing with the supplemental oxygen drastically outweighs that extra weight that you have to carry. It's so much easier. You move so much faster, but still, it definitely was a little bit of a last minute pivot. And at the end of the day, it didn't end up really mattering because we got up high, and as we kind of teased earlier on that May 24th attempt, I got up to Camp 4 doing really well, walked up another, I don't know, 150, 200 meters above Camp 4. I think I only made it to about 8,100 meters. And then I ran into an Asian trekking employee, one of the guides was coming down to find me because we actually had people above me already who were up at the balcony, some of our safety personnel, some of the film crew, and they were reporting really high winds. Like, unfortunately, all these forecasts, they give you a range. And so, okay, on the lower end, it was probably feasible. On the higher end, we knew it was going to be totally unfeasible. It was like, 70 kilometers an hour or something, which is, I don't, what is that, 45 miles an hour or something. And that's beyond our
Yep.
margin of safety. And unfortunately, it was in that range. And so I got the bad news from this random guy who I didn't even know, who came down and said, yeah, Dowser is turning everybody around. Everyone's coming off the mountain. So I don't think anyone summited that day. And yeah, by the time I got up there, it was too late. It was just the wind was too high. And yeah, pretty much just went down with my tail between my legs and assumed that was it. Assumed the whole project was over at that point.
Yeah, that's a bummer. But as you always say, the mountain decides. So,
Sure does.
not much you can do.
Yep.
All right. So that one didn't go because of the wind. What were your thoughts as you were coming down the mountain? Were you already thinking about another attempt, what you could do? How were you I mean, obviously you were very disappointed. You had already gone with O2, which you didn't want to do, and then you couldn't even make it because of the weather. So take us through your thought process at that point.
I was really disappointed, not just because we had failed, but because it felt like I hadn't even really gotten to give it an honest shot, between having to use the oxygen and getting turned around so early. It was kind of just starting to get hard at that point, and I still had, in theory, a few hours left, and I was very, very confident that record was going to go. And honestly, I think the disappointment came from the sense of just I didn't even get to really take a big swing at it. And
Yep.
to me, that was maybe the most disappointing part. So to answer the second part of your question, absolutely not. I mean, there's definitely, the stages of grief, and you have, denial.
Yep.
And then I think the second stage is bargaining. And I remember walking down and kind of half jokingly saying to some people, oh, I'm still in the bargaining phase. I'm thinking about if can I fly over to Tibet and like try it on the north side, or maybe we'll make one more attempt. But really, it wasn't realistic at that point. I was under the assumption that the information that we had been given was correct, which is, hey, the mountain is closing tomorrow. Like, you better get yourselves back down through the ice fall, because they're going to start pulling the ropes and ladders out, and that's really when the mountain, closes, is when they start pulling that stuff out of the ice fall. So I was under the impression that that was literally going to happen in the next 24 hours, and I was super, super bummed. I know I remember I called you guys. There was a Starlink dish at Camp 3, so I called you guys from 7,000 meters and just super, super bummed. And,
Yep.
it is what it is. Like, you work super hard for these things, and when they go, it's super fulfilling. And when they don't go, it's super devastating. Unfortunately, this was one of those where I just, was walking down with my tail between my legs. And again, I think the biggest thing was just I felt like I didn't get to even really take a crack at it.
Yeah. Yeah. And of course, we were heartbroken for you as well. Though happy you were back down the hill,
Yep.
at least part way down at that point. Um, so walk us through how you got to going back up the mountain just a couple of days later. Was your team supportive? When did it, go from, oh, there might be another window to I'm going to try this?
So we flew all the way back to Kathmandu that day. The same day I was walking down the mountain, and we end up just packing up all our stuff and getting out of there, because I didn't honestly want to be there anymore. I was pretty bummed. I just wanted to get out.
Sure.
And so I
Hmm.
flew back down the hill, met up with Chris and David back in Kathmandu. Was just super exhausted. I've been up all night, regardless of whether, I got to give 100% effort, just still super tired. But kind of my buddies talked me out. Hey, let's go grab a beer with our friend who was leaving town. Okay, we did that. I went back, went to sleep. Next morning, I wake up and I go down to the gym at the Aloft Hotel where we're staying in Kathmandu, just to kind of spin my legs a little bit on the bike. I always just like to do that after a big hard effort to get a little blood flow, some recovery, help everything feel better. And I'm, just kind of messing around on my phone, and I'm like, oh, look at the weather. Wow, there's a really good looking window on the 26th, 27th, 28th. That looks really good. And we kind of knew that, but again, we assumed the mountain had been closed. And then it was really texting some people and looking at social media and seeing that actually, hey, there's been a change of plans on the mountain. Long story short, there was a big team of Indian military guys who were trying to climb, and they had tried to climb on the 23rd, the day before I did, and also got turned around because of wind. I think there were, I don't know, 40 of them or something, so pretty big team. And India and Nepal obviously have a very special political relationship. They're really close together, and there's the Indian embassy has a big, big sway in Nepali politics. Even if it had been a group of 40 like American tourists, I don't know that this would have happened, but because they were Indian military guys and they were able to push through some pressure on the Nepali government through the Indian embassy, they actually forced the hand of the icefall doctors and said, "Hey, we really need you guys to keep the mountain open for another few days because this big Indian team wants to go for this last weather window." So all of a sudden, it went from this like pipe dream kind of bargaining stage of grief to, hey, actually, there really is one more day. There's exactly one more day, and it's on the 27th. And at this point, it would have been the morning of 25th, I guess. And I said, huh, I wonder what that would look like. My body didn't feel that bad. I got a good night's sleep. I'd been climbing with oxygen. That really helped, I think, on the recovery side. And so I went up to breakfast and had breakfast with Chris. And I said, Chris, like, what's it going to take you to go through the ice fall one more time? And that was really the start of it, was talking about it with Chris and thinking about, okay, can we just basically go back by ourselves? Because Asian Trekking, Dawa, Steven, like their whole camp had been broken down at that point. There was no one left on the mountain from our team. So I'm thinking, okay, Chris and I will just kind of fly by night and go back super low key. We'll just go do it ourselves. We don't even need a camp because we're just going to arrive, go up the mountain, and come back down. Um, and then it very quickly went from that to talking to Dallas Steven because we realized, as much as we didn't want to give him any more gray hairs as well, we did have to run it by him. We're on his permit, so he's legally liable for us. And then he starts talking to some other people who are still on the mountain, and we start talking about, okay, what can we get in terms of even just the tiniest bit of safety infrastructure? I didn't feel like we needed the big, multi-person team, but at the same time, just having even a couple bottles of oxygen high on the mountain for emergencies, you can solve an awful lot of problems if you've got that. So we found that we had oxygen up at Camp 4 that we were able to buy from another outfitter. And suddenly it went from this kind of pipe dream and like maybe this is like 1% realistic to, 80, 90%. It was really just, do we want to do this? Do I feel okay? And then literally like, 12 hours later, we're getting on a helicopter and going back to the mountains, which is totally outrageous. But it all happened really quickly. It was just once we got that
Yeah.
safety infrastructure in place and we figured out that the day was good and the mountain was going to be open, it was like, okay, if I feel good, really everything else is lining up for us to give it one more go.
Okay. Yeah. Certainly seemed like it certainly was quick, that's for sure, because you had already, as you said, come down the mountain and then just one last attempt. So, um, all right. So, what was different about the last attempt versus the first two?
Really, we wanted to kind of keep it simple. I think that as much as this project would not have happened without some of the bigger forces at play that had helped fund it and produce it and things like that, we have the film crew that we've talked about a little bit. That stuff, I think, got a little bit in the way, and there were too many cooks in the kitchen at times. Stuff got too complicated. One of my big takeaways from this whole season is it's just a tremendously complicated project. And the simpler that you can make the system, the fewer points there are for failure. And, as you know, it's like if you look at a combustion engine versus an electrical engine has like 1/100th of the parts. And so it's just a much simpler product. And I think of that in the same way on the mountain. The fewer parts there are, the fewer moving pieces, the fewer different people involved, the simpler it is, the easier it is to solve problems, the fewer points of potential problems there are. When I look at some of my best days in the mountains, a lot of them are really simple. It's literally sometimes just me and the mountain, or me and Chris, or me and Dawa, or me and Scott Penfield, whoever it is. It's just these very simple things where there's just you have the ownership and the empowerment and the responsibility, and so everything kind of just falls back on you. You don't have to rely on a big team. And while the big team is amazing and there have been so many people in our corner, I think at you can end up stepping on each other's toes, proverbially speaking, So I think that we saw this as this opportunity to almost go back to our roots and just make it really small, make it really simple, and just go up and do it. And that was really the idea, was okay, we had a small team. It was going to be me, it was going to be Chris, and Chris was going to help carry some stuff for me at the beginning, and then I was just going to go and go do it. And that was, when I think about my ideal scenario, like that's the ideal scenario, is just doing it myself. Obviously having people there to share the story and that minimal level of support, but I really wanted it to just be me in the mountain. That's kind of my dream scenario. So that was the biggest thing, was just there wouldn't be as many people on the mountain. Now, the counter to that in this case in particular is it means, especially with a mountain that's this big and the route is so long, that I was gonna have to carry a lot more stuff. So that was the biggest difference from an athletic perspective was I knew from the beginning I was going to be carrying much more weight than I had been before because realistically Chris, was going to help maybe get me up to camp one or something. And then basically I would have to carry everything else that I needed for the higher part of the mountain. So all of my really big layers, warm jackets, warm pants, all the extra boots, all that stuff, and then food as well is really heavy. When you think about Camp One to the summit and back is maybe as much as 20 hours of moving time. You're carrying a lot at that point in terms of just gels, food, liquid, all that stuff. So, instead of carrying maybe 3, 4, or 5 pound little tiny backpack, I was probably gonna be carrying 20 or 30 pounds on my back, of gear and food and water. And
Wow.
I kind of went into it knowing this is not going to be my fastest possible time. It's not going to be the equivalent of the F1 racer. It's like this is me and a Tacoma driving up the hill, hauling my own stuff. And I knew that, like we've talked about many times, the benefit of being really, really fit is you can have that effort that's maybe 75% of what you think you're capable of. And if you're super fit, then hopefully that's still enough. And that's really the attitude that I was going into it with was, okay, I'm going to have that C plus day. I'm going to have that 75% day between having to carry all this extra stuff, literally having just done this 48 hours earlier. My body is not going to be 100% recovered, even if I feel excited, even if I feel good about it. And I'm going to. I still think that there was enough margin there for me to get the record and give it an honest shot. So that was really what it came down to was, okay, given all this extra stuff, does this still feel feasible? And the answer to me was, yeah, I still thought so.
Okay. Yep. And it seemed to make sense at the time. So walk us through how it actually went. And of course, specifically, we know now that you didn't quite get all the way there. So what happened and what made you turn around so close to the summit?
Well, I think it's important to start actually with that afternoon. So Chris and I, like I said, flew out um, to EBC that morning of it would have been the 26th and arrived, midday. And I would say the vibes were really, really good. It felt almost like we'd removed all this pressure because it was like, okay, this really is the last attempt of the season. They're definitely shutting down the mountain now. There's no more good days in the forecast. So no matter what, this is it. And I don't know, in some ways you could look at that and say maybe that's more pressure, but I think for me it felt like because especially this felt like a cherry, like on top of the sundae, it didn't feel it was so unexpected. Like literally, most people didn't even know we were going to be there, and
Uh-huh.
that it felt like it removed pressure to me because it just felt like this is a freebie, this is an extra. And best case scenario, it's going to go. I really thought it was going to go. I was very confident that like we said before, that
I
kind of
remember.
that C plus effort, I think would get it. We weren't shooting for the
Yep.
moon. We weren't shooting to break the record by 10 hours. It was just, hey, if we break it by 5 minutes, that's fantastic. And I really thought that that was well within what I could do that day. So the vibes were super good. We get there, we're setting up. We did have one snafu, which was because of a weird permit bureaucracy thing with Nepal, where you actually have to close out a permit at the end of the season, and that had already been done for Chris, basically because he had gone down. He was sick, that last week at base camp. He had gone down before me, so his permit was actually closed
Uh-huh.
out, and we get a phone call on the way to the airport saying, hey, Chris can't go up the mountain. He can't take one step above base camp, basically, or else, he's going to get blacklisted from Nepal for like 5 years, which is not great, and gets Dawa in trouble
Yep.
and all this stuff. So Chris was not able to go up the mountain, but he ended up doing a fantastic job on the being our base camp communications guy anyways. So that worked out fine. But it did mean just that now,
He
okay,
was fantastic, and we were grateful to him
yeah. So
for keeping us informed of what was
for
happening.
sure, huge shout out to Chris for I mean he was literally up all night standing up in the mountains trying to keep comms with me. So that was really great. But it just meant, yeah, a little bit less support, even than we'd anticipated with our minimal support. But otherwise, I think the vibes were really good. Basically, until the last couple hours before we were going to leave, long story short, made the call to some of the supporters of our project and film team and let them know, hey, we're back at the mountain, surprise, and we're going back up. Uh, People kind of freaked out a little bit. I think that I tried to explain the same way that I explained to you guys and to Dawa. This is the thinking here. This is not brash. This is not, it's a quick decision, but at the same time, it's very well thought through, I thought. And we'd understood the risks and the safety concerns, and really just got some negative feedback there. From a couple people, particularly on the team. I think that was pretty upsetting to both Chris and I, because we really felt pretty confident about this, and we were kind of getting chewed out, to be honest, and from some people who we felt maybe had ulterior motives and weren't kind of being upfront with us. And honestly, like it was Chris and I were sitting in this tent, and this guy had called Chris to try and talk him out, or excuse me, to try and convince him to talk me out of this. And, I'm obviously just sitting there listening on speakerphone or whatever. And this guy is just kind of like shit talking me and saying, oh, like, Tyler is, he doesn't have the skill set. He's not ready. He can't do this. The mountain is so dangerous. And, even things like, oh, Dawa's not there and he can't do anything without Dawa telling him what to do and like where to put his foot every step of the mountain. And just all this like really disrespectful stuff from this person who was really,
Wow.
supposed to be in our corner. And whether he knew I was listening in or not, it was just a bummer, honestly, because this is someone who I really respected, and had some good conversations with, and to hear them talking like that, it really just kind of killed the vibe. And ended up just kind of getting off the phone and taking a nap and waking up and then giving Dallas Steven a call. And I think this was right before I would have called you guys. And he's just such an unbelievably good dude, and was able to kind of talk us off the ledge, so to speak, a little bit and say, look, you guys, you are ready. You can do this. You have the skill set. You've done big stuff in the mountains before, whether it's with, him, Dawa on the radio, or by ourselves, and just hearing that from someone who honestly, like, he has dogs in the fight on the other side. Like, he has all of the motivation in the world to tell us not to go, because he is legally
Right.
responsible for us. If something bad happens, he has to literally go find our dead bodies on the mountain, and that's complicated and expensive, and he doesn't want that. And the buck stops with him at the end of the day from a safety perspective. So he had all of the reason in the world to tell us not to go, and it would have been very easy for him. He could have literally just lied to us and said, "Oh, Tyler's permit's closed too. Sorry, you can't go up. There's nothing you could do." And I would have listened to him and believed him. And if he had, honestly, even if he just told me, "Hey, man, I don't think it's a good idea," even at that moment when we were already back at base camp, I still would have listened to him and said, "I trust you. I want to do this, but at the same time, it's not worth getting killed over." So, long at the end of the day, it was just that conversation really kind of got my head screwed on back in the right way, and then it was just like Groundhog Day of, okay, let's get ready to go again, like all of a sudden. And Chris and I are getting all our stuff ready, and we actually had a woman that we know, Kristen Harilla, if you're listening, famously broke Nims's 14 Peaks record. So she is a Norwegian woman, and she climbed all the 14 peaks in like 5 months with oxygen, of course. But we met her a bunch of times, and she's super cool. And she was coming down through the icefall like right before I was about to leave, literally within 30 or 45 minutes, and was staying at the same camp that we were at. So we chatted with her, and that also made me feel better, just seeing, hey, this person just came down through the icefall. She didn't die. Again, despite what this other person was trying to tell me, that the icefall was this, crazy death trap all of a sudden, even though we'd all gone through in the last couple days. So lungs, yeah, vibes were good. And eventually we just, did the same thing, got ready to go. Chris walked me out to Crampon Point, and then it was just another trip up the mountain, and at this point, everything was pretty similar. I was up through the icefall again, almost exactly the same time. I think an hour, 56 minutes to the top of Camp One.
Yep.
That felt really, quite good. We'll talk a little bit about that below. Obviously still trying to move quickly through there, but honestly, the icefall, the funny thing is, this person who is like having a freaking panic attack about the icefall, it was even even that day, which was, objectively, it was worse than it was at the beginning of the season. The crevasses are melting out, so they're a little bit wider. There's
Uh-huh.
been some collapses, but it still felt safer than any day that Chris and I had gone up the year before in 2024. The route was still just safer. It felt more stable. The anchors were all good. So really, it was not a big deal by comparison. So got up in, just under 2 hours. And then it was really at that point, I was trying to control my effort. I really didn't want to go out too hard. So the next few splits were quite a bit slower. But again, you got to remember I was carrying probably an extra 15 pounds of weight, 20 pounds of weight or something. So those, I think I was an hour and a half to camp two, and then maybe another hour and a half, 2 hours to camp three. Um, but still feeling pretty good at that point. And then very long stretch from 3 to 4. This is the first time I'd done that whole stretch without oxygen. I think it took me 5 hours or something to get to camp three.
Took a long
Yeah,
time.
that
Yeah, I
was a
remember.
long one, and I felt tired. But you're starting to get first light on that, and then you get dawn, and so it's. I think we left at 9 p.m. and it was almost exactly 12 hours to camp four. So now it's 9 a.m. Sun's out, your circadian rhythms are starting to kick in, and I was feeling pretty optimistic at that point. I'm like, okay, 12 hours. I've got 8.5 hours to get to the summit for the record, and I knew there were about 850 meters to go, so that pretty much lines up exactly 100 vertical meters an hour, which was I thought on the slow end of what I'd be capable of. And so I had a quick break up there and headed up the hill. And honestly, it was just slow. It was just really, really hard. My body was super tired. I actually think there's one important detail, which is I leave camp four, so we're at almost 8,000 meters now, and I took a gel less than 5 minutes out of camp, like before it even starts getting steep. And within like 20 seconds, I just threw up everything in my stomach that I just eaten. So, and
Oh,
it
wow.
was one of my caffeinated gels. I don't know if it was too much caffeine, if it was just too many gels. I probably had 30 gels at that point or something. So it's a lot of gels. Your stomach at some point does just say, fuck this, I'm not having any more of this. But, in retrospect, the right call would have been at that point, walk back to Camp 4, get a bunch more food in you, like real food, some soup, whatever, something that's not energy gels, and then maybe take some more food for the summit push. Again, that's not gels, just so you have a little bit more food diversity, mouthfeel diversity. I didn't do that. I just kept going. And I think that was kind of the beginning of the end, because then once I started hitting the steeper part of the route, which was, another 15 minutes up, I was so tired. I was so out of energy. And, it's a perfect storm, right? Because again, I've done an all-nighter on the mountain 48 hours before this. I've just thrown up probably the last hour, couple hours worth of nutrition that I'd taken in. So now I'm way under fueled. And my stomach also doesn't want to take any more gels, so I'm kind of trying to figure out what else I've got in my pack. And we've again talked about before how important the nutrition line is up there. And I think I was
Yep.
just and I've got the heavier backpack, so there's all these different factors that are all I think important. But at the end of the day, I'm just going too slow. I'm instead of going 100 meters an hour, maybe it's 90, then it's 80, and it's just really hard, and I'm moving really slow. And the other big thing is I had lost communications where the route goes above Camp 4. You're kind of on the other side of the summit ridge for a while. And so I had no line of sight to Chris. I had no radio communications with him. I had no radio communications with anyone else in the mountain. And, I had to keep just kind of doing the mental arithmetic and saying, okay, okay, you can do it, you can do it, you can do it. And eventually I got up to the balcony, which I think is 8,400. That took a really long time and just was feeling really bad. And the real thing that kind of I think eventually forced my hand was I started having these kind of fatigue hallucinations, which I've had before, where you kind of look at something that has maybe an organic and complicated shape like a rock or the snow, and I would start to see things in there that I know are not there objectively, faces, geometric patterns, like things like that. And
Wow.
this has
Mhm.
happened before, so I'm familiar with it. But at the same time, it is the sign that I'm right on the edge of being fatigued. And again, I'm at 8,400 meters at this point, so I've still got 450 meters to go. It's a long way. I'm only about halfway to the summit. It's taken me maybe 5 or 6 hours at that point. I know, like, I'm looking at the time, I'm thinking, okay, the record is going to be really tight. And the most exposed part of the mountain is the summit ridge above me, where you have literally 10,000-foot cliffs basically in both directions. Like you're walking on a, maybe 1 meter wide path at times. So there's really no margin for error in terms of safety at that point. If you aren't trusting yourself to be able to clip into the rope and do these things, which, you've done a million times, but at the same time, if you mess that up, if you clip into a rope that's not actually a rope that's in your head and is invisible, and then you weight that and you fall, you're going to fall into Tibet 10,000 feet down, and that's not what you want. So I
Yeah.
got to that point where I literally didn't trust myself to be able to do those things. And I you know, I'm the only person on the mountain at that point. The big Indian Army team is down. There's one other climber, I think, who I'd already passed her. She was down. So I'm the highest person in the world at this point. I'm the highest person on the mountain. There's no one above me. I have no communications. And at some point, I think I made it another 50 meters above the balcony, just under 8,500. It's the highest I've ever been in my life. So that's cool. I got an altitude PR, but still, it's also new territory. And I didn't trust myself. I didn't trust myself to be able to do those things and do it safely and get up and down safely for another, what realistically could have been 6, 8, 10 hours of climbing. I'm also going to be in the dark now. I'm realizing, like, summit wise, I'm thinking about what time I'm going to be on the summit, and I'm realizing I'm going to be coming down in the dark on the most exposed part of the route. So there are just all these things saying, no, don't do this. And as hard as that was in that moment, I think it also felt so much better than the previous time because I just knew that I couldn't. I had like squeezed every drop out of the proverbial lime. Like there was just nothing else to give at that point, and
Uh-huh.
that was hard, but it also felt so much better than being turned around and feeling like I know that I can get up the mountain. I did not feel that way in that moment. And, as much as that's pretty devastating still to have to wrap the project and be so close and so far away at the same time, it felt good to be able to make that decision, be in charge of myself, be in charge of my own project, and be turning around on my own terms versus being turned around by someone else or by the mountain. Yeah, so that was the moment. Then it was a very, very long trip still to get down the mountain back to camp 4 and then all the way back to camp 2. Getting there, I think, I don't know, I got there at like 11 p.m. and then had a little soup, slept for like 2 hours, and then got up after 2 hours of basically being passed out on a pile of rocks, and then walked all the way down to the ice fall. And I think it was, I don't know, midday that day that we were eventually back in Kathmandu. So it's really two all-nighters in a row, pretty much, on the mountain, super high, no oxygen. And I got back. It was probably the most exhausted I've ever been in my entire life. Was after that. Yeah, it was a very, very long 36, 48 hours. But again, I was so much more satisfied leaving on that note than if we'd left a few days earlier.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense because it was under your control and you gave it everything you had. It wasn't somebody else or some part of, the weather or something that you didn't have any say in. So
Yep,
that certainly should make it feel
for
better.
sure.
And I will say, as parents, this has been going on for a long time with you and to a certain extent with your sibling, where we're glad we don't know about these things to a certain extent until afterwards. You used to send us when you first started mountain climbing some of those pictures after you got back, and we'd say, "Oh my God, I can't believe you did this." And
Yep,
this one we were more attuned to because obviously we were paying attention, but we didn't know what was actually happening up on the
yep,
mountain. And I know I was in contact with Chris because he was worried at that point. He had said, in fact, he was going to try and get you to turn around at that
right.
point. Um, but I think we also, Annie Duke would be proud, I guess we should say, right? Because you really did listen to the predefined criteria you had and some of the signals you had, and you were willing to make the turnaround decision despite your proximity to the top of the
Yep.
mountain. And I think that takes a lot of courage and
Thanks.
a lot of maturity. So
Thank you.
we're, as parents, again, especially glad to hear that part because it makes us more able to sleep a little better and maybe get a few fewer gray hairs.
Yep.
But still, it's heartbreaking for us as your parents, although I know tougher for you.
Mhm.
Um, but at least, as you said, you were able to give it your all and get one chance at doing it.
Yep.
Um, so now if you look back on this, 3 attempts in 2 weeks, 2 in 3 days, I mean, that's a remarkable thing to me in and of itself. I think most people, even of your peers, right, who are do this for a living or think they're very good at this, you were pretty near the top, even with oxygen, on the second attempt, and then 2 days later, and flying back and forth from Kathmandu and all the other stuff that was going on. It's just remarkable that you were able to attempt it at all. So that is a testimony to your
Thanks.
fitness. But looking back on it now, of course, hindsight being 2020, what would you have done differently? And anything in your preparation move up to this point over the last several months um, that you would take into account your experience now for? Because most people never get up Everest once. You've tried 3 times now, so you've got to have a lot. You got a lot of
Yep.
experience, more than most people will ever have, except the Sherpas and other people who do it all the
Yep.
time. So, what are the big lessons and things you might have done differently?
I think the big thing, which I mentioned earlier, is just how complex of a project this is and how many interrelated factors there are that are, you can somewhat prepare for, but are somewhat outside of your control. From a fitness perspective in my preparation in the last 6 months, I don't know that there's much that I would do differently. I think that part went really, really well. Like the number one, the kind of the ticket to the club, so to speak, is you have to be really, really unbelievably fit. And I think I did a really good job with that part. I think I underestimated how much the rest of it would impact me. We're talking about the obvious stuff, the weather, the crowds, um, but also the other people on your team and coordinating with them and figuring out where people are going to be on the mountain when and who's going to have what stuff. And then the other big thing is gear. We like that first attempt. I still think that probably goes if my boot didn't break, unfortunately. And I hate to throw Sportiva under the bus because they make such good stuff. And for what it's worth, I have been in touch with them quite a bit in the last 3 weeks, and they've been doing like literal hardcore wear testing to try to recreate what happened. They literally like put a boot in like a minus 30-degree freezer overnight, and then we're like trying to yank on the zipper to see if they could recreate it, and they couldn't. So maybe we just had the freak like malfactured part. Like the zipper
Yeah,
itself had some kind of, brittle shear fracture already in it or something, and then, that cracked.
yeah,
Who knows? Like
yeah,
you can drive yourself crazy with that. But, something like that is it's so random, and being able to just problem solve and figuring out, okay, what is going on with this stuff, and is there ways to have backups of gear, things like that. But really it's just everything is complicated and everything is interrelated, and the environment just makes everything more prone to failure, whether it's your gear, whether it's the other people. The weather can change, like we saw on the second attempt, where hey, we thought it was going to be 30 kilometers an hour and it was 70, and that's the difference between being able to go to the top and not. And then, the South Side, we knew this from the beginning, and it was always one of the big questions is, okay, how are you going to deal with all the crowds on the mountain? And the problem is, yeah, we can, my pithy answer was always, well, we just go on a day when there aren't that many crowds, but that means you're either going pretty much the first day of the season or the last day of the season. And that's really, it's what we ended up doing, and it
yeah,
worked to an extent. But it does create its own issues because now suddenly you have you're forced to go early, and if that doesn't go, then you're really just waiting around for that absolute last possible minute case. And you know the big thing, like, what would I have done differently? Well, I wouldn't have gone on the 24th if I'd known that I was going to be able to go on the 27th. Again, I think if we take that
yeah,
day out, then it probably goes as well. Especially if we had a little bit more support on the mountain, if we still had Dawa and our Sherpa team there, even if it was kind of a pared down operation, where I don't have to carry 20 or 30 pounds up the mountain, like between not having an all-nighter in my legs and body from 2 nights earlier, and also just having that ability to move a little bit lighter and quicker. Yeah, it probably goes there too. I think just all that stuff, it's just such a complex project. Obviously, yeah, being fit, it just opens more doors. It's great. But at the end of the day, you can't just muscle your way through it. Like if it's really bad weather,
yeah,
or you have a critical gear failure, you can't muscle your way through that. You've got to be able to have a little bit of luck beyond what you can control. So I think that's the
yeah,
number one thing. Is just the complexity of the project and how interrelated all of that complexity is. Um, the
yeah.
other the other
Hmm.
big thing, yeah, go
And
ahead.
especially you're so dependent on the gear,
Yeah,
especially because. it's such a complex environment that you're dealing with between the weather and the
Yep.
terrain. You just need all sorts of
Yep.
gear. It's not like running a trail race or running a
No.
marathon where you just need a pair of
And it's
shoes.
not even like, you can't necessarily just solve everything with duct tape and gumption. You have to if
Right,
you're
right.
my boot had a failure, but it could have been my harness. It could have been my helmet. Things that are really critical pieces of safety gear that are without those things, it's a complete non-starter. And they're not simple things to repair when you're up there because they have to be so robust and deal with
Yeah,
such a challenging climate. So yeah, it's a
yeah.
complex project. Complex project.
So do you think the next time you would try and have more backup gear at various places on the mountain? Can you do
Maybe,
that
yeah. I
practically?
mean, kind of like you can only carry so much stuff up the mountain.
Right, but you can have it staged at the
Right, exactly.
camps,
So
right?
sure, you could potentially have some extra stuff, but it's like, what are you gonna do? Have a pair of boots at every single camp? Maybe. But even just that part, like even just the staging of your gear is complicated. Someone has to carry that shit
Yeah,
to 8,000 feet. Excuse me, 8,000 meters. 25 to 26,000 feet. That's just carrying that stuff up there is a big ask of someone, whether it's you or someone else.
yeah,
So yeah,
yeah.
I don't have a fantastic solution. I think yes, you can have some things as backup, and I did have extra stuff to an extent, but you can't just have infinite of everything. What happens if you break two boots? Like if you can't have six pairs of boots up there, you know, there's only so much. So,
Yeah,
um,
yeah.
yeah, I
Hmm.
think the other thing that I found, and again, this goes to our bookending the season idea of either going first or last, is I felt like I spent too much time at Everest Base Camp. I knew I didn't want to spend a ton of time there, and I just felt that wore me down a little bit. I felt like I probably lost some fitness in those whatever it was 2 weeks or so between the first attempt and the last attempt. I wasn't sleeping quite as well, and it's just yeah, just really hard to train. I even found literally just like looking at my body when I got down to Kathmandu, I felt like I'd lost muscle mass. I felt like I'd lost definition. And I think that you know at the end of the day, I was planning to be up there high for maybe 5 weeks, and really it ended up being almost 8 weeks. And that's a really big difference between to be spending, at 5,000 meters or above, my time in Kare and my time at EBC. The EBC time was just supposed to be a couple days, and suddenly that becomes a couple weeks. And your body, even my body, I think I'm pretty good with altitude, but man, like you spend a lot of time over 5,000 meters, and I think you just kind of start breaking down a little bit. So that's another thing that I would definitely do differently is, if that first window doesn't go, I would just assume that it's going to be 2 weeks, and then I would just go somewhere else. I would go back to Kare. I would go down lower on the mountain, somewhere with more oxygen to recover a little bit and just train better. That was definitely a big one.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Um,
Hmm. Okay.
and then I think, yep, go
What
ahead.
about comms? Is there a way to improve comms? Or were you satisfied that the communications were okay, as good as it can get, just given
Yeah,
the
I mean, there's
terrain
kind
and
of like those
things?
blackout points. We know where those are. It doesn't really help knowing where they are if you still can't communicate. Um, I think I didn't realize that that was going to be such a bad spot right there because I have my Garmin inReach and I can communicate with that. So that would have been another way to communicate back and forth would be using the Garmin. You could also use the satellite phones. There are other things you could do. Obviously, you don't want to carry too much extra stuff, but I think yeah, probably using the inReach would be the important thing for important comms there, and then just like having like that in my head as okay, these are the spots that are going to probably be dead zones. And I should be checking my inReach during those times. Yeah. But another big thing that I found is the way that the route is set up with the icefall at the beginning makes it really, really hard from a pacing perspective because you don't want to go slow there. So in a sense, when you
Right.
have an ultra marathon, especially, you generally want to start out way slower, and at least in terms of effort level, you want to keep your heart rate down. You want to kind of ease into the effort. Like almost all of my best races are ones where I start out slower and then kind of work into it. The icefall almost forces you to do the opposite. You're starting out almost like redlining just to get through there as quickly as possible because time equals danger in the icefall. And the you know I think it's a combination of both. I'm moving quickly and also I'm just nervous and anxious in there, and so your heart rate is going to be elevated, and that's really hard. It's really hard to have basically a 2 hour hard chunk at the beginning and then dialing it back, settling in, trying to bring the heart rate down and settling into a different zone. That made it really hard for me, and then I think related to that is fueling. fueling is so critical in ultra efforts, and I've talked about it before that I think at high altitude it's even more so. And when I threw up all that stuff like we talked about, I think that was pretty much the nail in the coffin. I really needed to just sit down and like eat an entire pizza at that point, which unfortunately was not an option, and I didn't do it anyways. But I think that
Yeah.
it just keeps reiterating for me that the long stuff fueling is so important, and if you miss a little bit, especially up high, it's just a humongous problem. And then the last thing I'll say is that heavy pack, I think just being prepared to carry a little bit more weight, because you never know. Again, going back to gear, you never know what's going to happen. It could be a situation like this where all of a sudden you have to carry much more weight, but even just, I think training with an extra 5, 10, 15 pounds on your back, I think that's always going to be good. I'm not a huge dude. I'm not like the strongest dude. And I think I move really well with really light weight. But if you all of a sudden throw an extra 15, 20 pounds on my back, it really affects me, because that's a higher percentage of my body weight. I'm not as strong. It doesn't, I haven't trained for that. And I think that was a big part of it for me. So yeah, definitely those are kind of all the big takeaways. But at the end of the day, I'm grateful I got the opportunity to go up there, and we'll kind of see what happens now.
Yes, well, we're certainly incredibly proud of you. And now, of course, happy and not terrified because you're not up there running up Mount Everest.
Yep.
You can't say we weren't terrified and up all night a couple of times when you were doing that, more or
Yep.
less. But that's we're incredibly proud of the effort
Thank
you
you.
made and the things that you did, and hearing this even more uh, proud that of your maturity and your ability to keep your head about you, even in spite of being in a very, very difficult and challenging
Right.
situation. hmm So, everyone, of course, including your parents, your mother and I, wants to know, are you going back? And if so, do you know when?
Uh, well, it won't be that soon if I do. I guess I'll give an actual answer here because it's been long enough, and because this is my program. I think that if we can sort out the finance side, I would go back for sure. So that's the big question. Everest is very expensive in terms of both finances, but also in terms of opportunity cost, the energy that it takes to train for this project. It's very specific kind of training. So we're talking about another 6 months of my life, and tens of thousands of dollars to go back there. So if I can kind of wrap my head around that, and we can figure out the financial side, with sponsors and things like that, yes, 100%. I think that I walk away from this project both seeing the complexity in it, but also knowing like 100% this is in my wheelhouse, and that is really exciting for me. And I do feel, almost like an obligation to go back, because it feels like an important project. It feels like something that really caters to my strengths and my skill set. And if anything, after this year, I feel more ready than before, just because I've had so much experience in the mountain. So yes, I would definitely go back. It's complicated. There's a lot of stuff to figure out, but if the situation is there, if the opportunity is there, I will definitely be back there, definitely give it another go. In terms of when, well, the soonest time would be September. September is very complicated. It's not many people climb in September in the autumn season. It's much, much, much snowier, because you have right now the monsoon season starting in Nepal, which is June, July, and August, which means it's raining in the lowlands, and it means it's dumping snow on the mountains in the high country. So a lot of people are actually going in the fall to do ski projects because there's way more snow, it's better snow. There are not as many people going for things like speed records. That said, if you look historically, the two people who we've talked about a lot on this podcast with records on Everest, Kaji Sherpa and Mark Batard, both summited in September for their speed records. So there is some historical precedent of that happening. Yeah.
Interesting.
So like for example, the ice fall is actually much more filled in. So instead of those big crevasses, a lot of the snow kind of just packs it down. So in some ways, it's a little bit easier. It's also can be more dangerous in different parts of the mountain, just because you have more avalanche risk with so much more snow. But the ice fall itself, I think, is much more straightforward in the autumn. There's also the north side. There's the Chinese side, Tibetan side. So that is another option in the fall. I do know there's an American team that will be on the mountain in the fall, and I'm trying to coordinate with them already to see, hey, is there any way that we can get on there? Because in general, Mountaineering Association on the north side does not grant normal permits in the fall. It makes it very complicated. I think it's very, very unlikely that that would work out. So then you're left with the south side, which again, there are very few climbers, and it would become a much more complicated and expensive project because you basically have to do all the rope fixing ourselves, with me and Chris and Dow and the Asian tracking team. So that would, it's not impossible, but it's complicated. Obviously, you wouldn't have the crowds, but you have other things. You have more snow and you have the added logistical complication. So realistically, the simplest thing is to say, it's going to be another 11 months, until we're able to be back on the mountain. But, best case scenario, if there's an option to go in September, that would be amazing. I would love to have that as an opportunity, but realistically, we'd probably be looking at spring of 2026.
Okay. Well, we'll be holding our breath as your parents then for
I
another
know, me too.
year.
Tell me about it.
We'll try and get some sleep in
Yeah,
between.
no, it'll be nice to do some more just kind of trail running. And so for people listening, I am currently signed up for UTMB, the Ultra Trail Mont Blanc, 170K. It's a 100-ish mile race, and that's really, it's something I've been excited about for a really long time. I've been at that event. It's the Super Bowl, it's the World Cup, whatever you want to call it, the Grand Slam of trail running. It's the most competitive race in the world, and it's one of the most iconic and beautiful races in the world. That's at the end of August, early September. So, obviously, if I'm on Everest in September, that would have to get pushed back. But if I'm not on Everest in September, then I would definitely be racing UTMB, and that'll be the build up for the next couple months. So, either way, I'm excited. There's good stuff coming up, that I'm really excited about, and it'll be a Groundhog Day, I guess. Again, getting ready, maybe next spring.
Okay. All right. Thanks so much for sharing as usual. Anything else you want to add before we wrap up?
Really just gratitude. I'm really grateful to the mountain for letting me get up and down safely. It's such a beautiful place. I love being there, but it's intimidating, it's scary up there, and I'm glad to be back down safely and here somewhere warm and relaxing for a while. And so there's definitely a big sense of gratitude for just having survived the season, and I learned a lot, and also just to the unbelievable team that we've put together and people that I had in my corner, between Chris, Dawa, Dave, Dr. Ben, all those people on the mountain itself, all the Sherpa who helped with logistics and fixing rope and carrying loads and all that stuff. And then, so many people just around the world. I won't even try and thank all of them. But, just every single person, even if it's a just random stranger sending something nice on social media. I got just an unbelievable outpouring of support, love, messages from people from around the world, some of whom were blasts from the past, literally people from high school who I haven't heard from in 20 years. And, your friends, and just total strangers from literally, I think Brett Van Dorn, big shout out to him. He put the tracker together, and we had like 95 countries or something,
Yep.
people who were following along on the tracker, and literally like, I don't know, 100,000 people or something were paying attention. So it was just really wild for me to see that as, someone who, ran Division 3 in college, and like, I always loved this stuff, but I never assumed that like anybody else would care about what I was doing. And it's yeah, just been really, really unbelievable to see the support, both from the people who are close to me in my circle as well as just out there in the world. So thank you. I feel just so incredibly grateful for that. And, of course, you guys, my family, it's just like, I know I'm giving you guys a lot of gray hairs, more gray hairs. I know you've still got some to turn, but yeah, having you guys support, and even just being able to call you from the mountain was so wonderful, and well, maybe not wonderful, but meaningful. And yeah, it's just I feel a lot of gratitude right now. Obviously, I wanted it to end differently, but it's pretty meaningful to have had this experience, and I'm looking forward to whatever the next thing is that it springboards me towards.
Great. Yeah. And I will say one thing that we learned, certainly through this experience, beyond how to get gray hairs, is how great your support community is, and how many people, as you said, including people that I couldn't believe getting in touch with me, my peers that were following you that I didn't even know about. So big shout out to everybody, and a terrific community around you that was so supportive of all your attempts and really in your camp. It's something to see. It's a great group of people, and was really heartwarming to us as your parents to see how solid their support was no matter what was happening on the mountain. In fact, the biggest um, thing that was driving everybody nuts was the blind
Yeah.
spots, and in particular the lack of GPS and tracking. So you just disappear for a couple of hours, and everybody's Everybody's like,
losing their
"Where's
mind. Yeah.
Tyler? Where's Tyler?"
Yeah. Awesome.
Okay, well then, bring
Yeah,
us
and I
home.
guess the last thing I'll say, we probably will take a short break here for, probably 1 to 2 weeks, I would guess, as we actually do figure out what's happening in the fall, what I'm training for. But I think it would be great. We'll be back in a couple weeks as I'm getting ready for whatever it is that's next, that's coming in September. So thank you all who've been watching, listening, reading from around the world. It's been such a fun project over these last few months, Mr. C, to do this with you and share it. And again, like you said, hear from all these people who kind of came out of the woodwork. So we'll definitely be back with more talking with my dad in the next couple weeks, but we'll kind of call this the end of our first season, and we will end it there. So thank you guys for listening. As always, please send us any feedback, questions, comments, concerns, hopes, dreams. You can send those to my email, ty@chotsky.run, or DM me on Instagram at Tyler C. Andrews. Remember, you can read my raw training logs as well on my blog at tylercandrews.com or via Substack at Tyler C. Andrews. Ty's Training is a Chotsky Media production brought to you by the good folks at Chotsky Endurance Collective, the world's leader in online coaching, travel, and community for endurance athletes. Thank you all so much for listening this week and over the last few months, and we will talk to you soon. Okay? Ciao, everybody.